Hello there, and welcome to What's the Point? A question we should all be asking ourselves, and the podcast by brand architect Bill Ellis that will help you discover, clarify, and live your purpose.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to What's the Point? I'm Bill Ellis, your host, and I'm really excited today to have, for the first time ever in this podcast, a part two. And that part two is with my guest and patriot and dear friend, Rocky Sickmann. Hello,
Bill,
Rocky.
thanks for having me back, buddy.
Oh, thank you for coming back. Your story is so powerful. And in the first episode, and if you're listening now and haven't listened to part one, let me urge you to hit pause, go back an episode, and listen to part one, because Rocky's story is unique and powerful and filled with lessons that we can all learn. So thank you for sharing that. But the reason that we decided that we wanted to go a second episode is because after Rocky's episode of being a hostage in Iran for 444 days, there's been so many further lessons and insights and experiences and stories that I just felt had to be shared. So Rocky, again, thank you for not just your time here, but for your demonstrating what a true patriot is.
Thank you for sharing the story about the Iran hostages.
Well, and that's what I want to talk about, because the Iran hostages certainly are the core of the story, but there's so much more than that. I'm going to go through this in kind of a random order, but I'm going to just let you take it where it goes. But there's a lot of points that we discussed that I want to talk about. So the Iran hostages are certainly a topic. The Canadian embassy personnel and Argo is a topic, but a topic I want to touch on is a group of people that Rocky says, I am not a hero. The heroes are the people who made the effort to rescue us. Tell us about that, when you heard about it, and what your impact is.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, Bill. As all the hostages would say, we're not the heroes. It's the guys that had the guts to try. 1980, April 24th, they basically started off on a mission to rescue the Iran hostages. I had no idea that, that other individuals would risk their life to come over to regain my freedom. In fact, as I sat tied to the chair for the first 30 days, I sat there and thought about the Vietnam veterans and how they were treated when they came back. They were forgotten. Nobody cared about them. They were spit on. And so I thought we were forgotten. Little did I realize that the morning of April 25th, a group of brave individuals, guys that had the guts to try, landed in the desert of Iran, and major catastrophe, a CH-53 helicopter collided with a C-130, plane ignited, killing 8 individuals. The mission was aborted. Excuse me, Bill. It was aborted, and I got to meet these guys after I returned home, and I was told that 8 people lost their life because of me. And wow. I tell you, every morning I wake up, I think of those 8 individuals, and right over here I have the names of each one of those 8 individuals that lost their life. But the guys that survived, they said, Rocky, was one of the worst mornings of our life. Not only were we not going to be able to come rescue you, we had to leave our fellow comrades burn in the desert. And, it wasn't traumatic for just us. It was traumatic for those guys. But it's one of those things. I've got to meet these individuals to hear their stories, as they were interested to hear our stories. But again, had no idea until 444 days later that there had been an attempted rescue operation, Operation Eagle Claw. There's a lot of documentaries on that, so I ask that your viewers go out and read up a lot of great individuals. In fact, our CENTCOM, our rescue command, is basically made up because of that failed rescue operation in 1980. Everything that happened there, things were, learned from that failed attempt, and it's much better than what it was back then.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I do want to just make a personal point of clarification from my perspective on something you said, where those 8 people died because of me, your words. I disagree with that absolutely 100%. Those 8 people died because you were worth attempting to save, as were all the other 51 hostages. They died because of their courage and because of their commitment, because they dared to try, and because we weren't going to stand for that type of terrorist activity. So
Yeah,
I can sense why you might feel a little bit of guilt or blame, but there's no reason in my view.
yeah, and
And I just wanted to say that.
well, thank you, Bill. And really, as the hostages, we had no idea what was happening. Communications from inside Iran to D.C. President Carter had heard that the hanging judge was going to put all of us on trial, and they were going to hang us in the city of Tehran. And so, number one, they had to come up with charges for each one of the hostages so that they could show the Iranian people that we were bad people.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when President Carter heard that the hanging judge was going to put us on trial, he knew he had to do something. So, but we had no idea of this information, and so, but yeah, it is one of those interesting things that happen that it will be with me for the rest of my life, Bill.
No doubt, and the fact that you are able to and willing to share that for us that haven't been there, to appreciate what true heroes and what true patriots go through is a gift. So again, thank you for being here. I want to be very cognizant of your time. I know you've got a tight window today, and I appreciate your accommodating me and all of our listeners and viewers. So you talked about. Well, okay, I'm just trying to decide which order to go in here. Let me start with this. In the first episode, you talked about finally getting on the plane, having the plane stopped for 20 minutes until President Reagan had been sworn in and President Carter had moved on, as a slap in the face. And then that plane took off, and you also mentioned you thinking about the Vietnam veterans and how were you welcomed home? How were you and the other hostages welcomed home?
From my perspective, incredible. And I think everybody was somewhat surprised that after we got on that plane that night of January 20th, after 444 days, we thought people were missing. Little did we know that other people had been let go. And so for those listeners and viewers that weren't with us the last time, it was one of those things that the Islamic Republic of Iran told us in our interrogations. It's not you, the American people, we hate. It's your government, but we will use you to humiliate your government. So sure enough, that January 20th, they sat us on the runway after they put us on the airplane, and the individuals on the plane were Algerians, and they reassured us that no, everybody is here, that the others were let go a year earlier. So that plane finally took off, and we get into Turkish airspace. We came unglued. We then knew at that time that we were freed. 2 fighters were escorting us to Athens, Greece. Athens, Greece, we weren't allowed to get off the airplane. We then get new pilot, new stewardesses, and they take us from Athens to Algiers, where we then get off the airplane. I then kissed the ground, which I just so happened my left cheek was completely hanging out of my pants because they were completely ripped, and I had worn those pants for over 200 days. But I really didn't care. I mean, I kissed that ground that I was on, and so we had a small ceremony there in Algiers. We then walk over and we board medevac planes. And as I'm walking up the medevac plane, they go, "Mr. Sickmann, welcome home." And I looked at him, I said, "How did you know who I was?" And he goes, "Oh, we're from Scott Air Force Base. We've been following you for the past year." And so it was kind of strange to hear that, people were following us. And it's like, what do you mean following us? So from Algiers to Germany, across the Mediterranean, they tried to give us documents to read and listen to, and that there was this Ted Koppel that had created Nightline to tell the American people, and really the whole world, of what was happening to the Iran hostages. We had no idea. We land in the morning, and I want to say it was very early, 4 o'clock. something of that nature in Germany, and there had to be over 100,000 people at this airport.
Wow.
I mean, early in the morning, and it's like you're wondering what the heck is going on. And these people had been waiting. They had built bleachers and everything, waiting for us for a year. And it's like all these stories kept going through, and they then bus us to a hospital where we obviously got to make our first phone call home. And I spoke to my mom and dad. And my father, at that point in time, says, Rocky, Jill's here. And this was the young lady that was my icon, just like the movie Castaway.
Yeah.
He had a locket. I didn't have a locket. It was her picture that made me drive myself that I was going to not let these people get the best of me. And so I got to speak with Jill, and that's when she told me, Rocky, you've got to make a decision, either me or the military. And so it was a hard decision. I chose wisely, though. And obviously, after that time, from Germany, we then flew to Shannon, Ireland to New York, where we flew into Stewart, an airport there. It was an abandoned airport then, but now it's open. And they had a parade from Stewart all the way to West Point. And again, that was like 40 minutes. And from there, met with my mom and dad for the first time. We spent a couple of days there. We then flew to Andrews Air Force Base. We then spent a night there. They tailored our dress blues in less than 24 hours so that the next morning we could leave. And I boarded an Ozark airline with a yellow ribbon around the Ozark airplane and that morning, leaving D.C. I mean, it was just a whirlwind. I mean, incredible things as I talk about it. And I've got pictures because at times I really pinch myself and say, did that really happen? It's, it's like a movie I've seen. I'm just telling you about it. And we get into St. Louis and they do a flyby because at the control tower in St. Louis, they had a yellow ribbon around the tower. And so they wanted me to see this ribbon, which just so happens to be the ribbon in the Soldiers Memorial Museum in St. Louis. And so we landed, and there were over, I don't know, 1,000, some 2,000 people. A lot of them my relatives that had waited. And so we boarded a car, and a gentleman says, Rocky, we're going to go over to the Marriott, and we're going to do a press conference. And I looked at the guy, I said, what's a press conference? And so that was the first time I was thrown into this. And for there, did the press conference, got onto a Mid-America bus, I believe it was, and drove all the way out to Krakow, Missouri, which is about 80 miles out. And there were people lined up all the way. I mean, again, I've got to really question myself at times. Did it really happen? But I got pictures of all this stuff. And so I have to tell myself that, yeah, it did. And why, I have no idea. Because 52 people could have easily been let go and could have been forgotten, as I thought we were. But little did I know I was wrong.
Well, that is just a fascinating journey from torn out bottom pants in custody of some Iranian radicals to the welcoming arms and hearts and eyes and applause of U.S. citizens throughout the country and also in other countries. That's amazing. Just a quick note of clarification. You mentioned Scott Air Force Base. The significance of that for listeners that aren't aware, Rocky is essentially from St. Louis, from Krakow, just a bit outside of St. Louis, and Scott Air Force Base is a bit outside of St. Louis across the Mississippi River in Illinois. So they were kind of like your homies, keeping an eye on you in particular.
Right.
Which all of the hostages, but they felt that connection because you were in essence a local. So so much to talk about. You came home and you are very quick and have been since I've known you for a lot of years. So quick to point out the blessing of Jill, your wife, and what she's meant to you, not just getting you through captivity with the vision of her, but her support and her being with you all these years. Tell us about Jill.
Yeah, she was a young lady that I had met when I was in Europe, My sister at the time was working at the hospital. She had met this young lady, just broke up with her boyfriend, and she told me that she had me set up for a blind date. And so I got home a month later, because back then it was before the phones. It was all writing, Bill.
Mm-hmm.
And so she wrote me this letter, and I'm sitting there thinking, Jill Ditch? Who's Jill Ditch? And I'm thinking, my sister got me set up with a bow wow and, all this other stuff. And so, but I knew her brother. And I knew that her brother married a young girl from my hometown of Crocodile, Missouri, and they just had a baby. And so I'm thinking, if anything, I'll be able to get to see them. And that night, I knocked on the door, and that door opened, and I'm like, holy cow. And this is early 1979. And so her and I connected. I was stationed at Camp Geiger, North Carolina. I was driving home from Friday to Saturday. We'd have a date that day, get back in my Chrysler Cordova and drive all the way back to North Carolina. I did that twice a month, but she was just graduating from high school, and we were so young. She was going to go to school for a dance. She had a scholarship for dancing. And I said, hey, I got this last gig I'm doing a Marine security guard. So we both had our interest, and we were going to connect in December of 1979. Obviously, we were taken. She was my icon. I came home, and I can tell you, if it wasn't for Jill, Bill, I would be in a ditch somewhere. She has been able to pick me up, because coming home from something like that, it was very challenging. I mean, it still is interesting to this day when you go out and people are like coming up, and she's always been very kind and understanding, knowing what happened to me. But what happened to her, my mom, my dad, they were thrown into the media to do all these different interviews. That's why I always said there's so many stories. It's not only the Iran hostages, and it's not only the guys that were on the mission, but it's the family members that also went through hell for 444 days and even after. But I can tell you, I dress like this because I would probably still be in military greens if it wasn't for my wife. Because she dresses me, makes sure I'm wearing the right stuff. And so, but yeah, since then we have been very blessed to have 3 wonderful children, and again, going through 444 days of captivity. You might look right on the inside, but you're all screwed up on. Might look right on the outside, but I'm all screwed up on the inside. And there are a lot of issues where, raising children and different things, and I'm such a hygiene person. I take a shower every morning because I can. 444 days, I couldn't. There are different things that I was always neurotic about, and so my poor family had to go through these stages. And I could be on and on and on and on, but I don't want to share all my laundry with everybody. But my poor kids go through a lot. But since then, both my oldest daughter, she's married 2 grandchildren. My middle daughter married grandchildren, and my son Spencer, as you talked about, being an actor, he got to be, his first movie was the movie Argo. So we were able to connect, and it's on and on and on. I mean, 43 years ago, Bill, and here you and I are on this day of 8/3/22. We're talking about the Iran hostage crisis. It doesn't ever go away, it seems like. But, I'm very blessed to my wife, God love her. She is still with me and keeps me on track each and every day.
Well, I think that's incredible. I look forward, hopefully, to meeting Jill at some point. She probably gets tired of meeting people that want to meet her because of how you talk so highly of her, but it's deserved. And thank you for bringing up the families, because that was on my list to discuss the extended impact and the impact to the nation, frankly, because I do remember that we felt helpless at the time, and tying a yellow ribbon around the old oak tree is a nice show of support, but it did nothing other than make us feel a little bit better. So let me stay on the family side, because I want to get into a little bit more detail, please, if you will, excuse me, on your children, in particular your son who had aspirations of being an actor. Share with us, please, Rocky, the listeners and the viewers, the story about how you met someone who knew someone who ended up having you be in the family of the Argo production.
It's synchronicity. It's in place and we'll meet. My wife and I are at a wedding in Columbus, Ohio. And father of the bride goes, Rocky, I want you to meet Sister. She's a casting director. I'll never know that someday might be able to help your son. And Spencer at this time was in college, Akron, Ohio. And so he gave this young lady my call. He said, hey, if anything ever pops up, please let me know. Son, has always been interested in acting ever since he was 6 years old. And so sure enough, she takes my card. 3 days, she's typing a email that is exchanging emails to her friend that also lives in L.A., another actor, and she's asking her, working on. Girl comes back and says, I'm working on a about the Iran hostage crisis with Ben Affleck, George Clooney, John Goodman, a cast of others, and the girl we had just met back and said, well, I just went the hostages at a wedding this past weekend. And responded, well, who was that? She was Rocky Sickmann. And she goes, wait, Rocky Sickmann, was he one of the Marines? And she goes, yeah, he was. His character, which I had no idea at this point in time, Bill, that there was a movie being created about not 52, but about six individuals. Three of those individuals I had breakfast with on November 4th, 1979. Little did I realize that after I had breakfast, for an ambassador. So anyway, this girl goes, yeah, well, yeah, Rocky, his character is in a movie. And our friend right away wakes up upon herself and says, what's the chance of meeting Rocky? He was one that was becoming an actor, possibly get him in a movie. Girl comes back and says, well, that's a long shot. Let me see what Ben thinks about Rocky coming in. 2 days later, a total of 5 days after, girl comes back and says, Ben would love to meet Rocky. Bring him out, bring his son, and we'll put him in. Shit like that doesn't happen all the time, Bill. So my son and I jump on a flight, and we are in L.A. the next 6 days after meeting this woman at a wedding. My son and I, I'm meeting Ben Affleck. Spencer gets a mail delivery guy in the CIA scene. I'm in the back watching the whole piece. Ben has me come back out, and I get to speak cast of Argo. And they had met the six that, my colleagues that were at the visa building that escaped that morning to the Canadian embassy. But they had not, those in the movie, never met hostage that had been there for 444 days. So Ben had me speak to the cast and, expound on what happened to us, which again, one day being held hostage is a lot. My colleagues, they were there for 80 days, hidden by the Canadians. That's a lot. And then for the movie, Tony Mendez, what an incredible, brave American that's no longer with us. I got to meet Tony. He worked for the day. But he went over there, and we could be here today talking about that movie. People, your viewers, listeners have not seen it. Definitely have to see it. So we are invited to the red carpet premiere. My wife and I, Spencer and my daughter. And so that night we're lit the red carpet, and we're walking out to our car, and I get a tap on my shirt, and it's Ben Affleck. He goes, Rocky, I got one more favor. I said, whatever I can do, Ben. Next week we're going to be at the embassy, and I'd love to have you be my guest at the Canadian embassy to unveil this movie. And I said, I told him the story about how when I got to Iran in 1979, they had a clay court, and I had played tennis in Asia and the U.S. and the Middle East, Iran. They had a court, and I never played one there. And I was playing tennis every day, and the ambassador saw that I was a pretty good player. He said, Rocky, I noticed you're a good tennis player. Would you be a partner? I said, sure, I'd be honored. Who do we play? He goes, we have to play the Canadian ambassador, his assistant. I said, sure, I'd be honored. A week before we're taken hostage, our ambassador and I, we smoked Taylor. And little did we realize that he would be our six people a week later. And so when I met Ken Taylor at the Canadian embassy, all these years later, I go up to him, Ambassador Taylor, Rocky Sickmann goes, I know who you are. How's your tennis game? Never forgotten about how we'd smoked him. And so he had passed away. So Bruce Langdon, wonderful ambassador, and Ken Taylor and Tony Mendez, three people. And so.
So again, thank you for sharing that. And you talked about things like that just not happening. A lot of your life comes under that heading, serendipitous journeys that we just can't anticipate. But the fact that you were able to just accept the journey as it was laid out in front of you for the most, and I'm sure there were times when you had doubt and anger and all that kind of stuff, but overall, you've been on this journey in a very open and accepting and brave way. Even though you will not call yourself a hero, I will continue to call you a brave patriot. And you talk about your wife Jill, and I've always heard that behind every great man there's a woman, and I prefer to say behind every great person there's a person. And I know that you two are gifts to each other, and your son being able to have a part in Argo gave him a taste of that. But let me move on because there's two things. Let me not move too much further because I want to talk about anyone viewing. I'm holding up the book that Rocky had written, and it's called Iranian Hostage: A Personal Diary. And if you can see it on YouTube, or if you have a copy, there's this handsome, young, proud, brave Marine on the cover. That's Rocky. And Rocky and I first met after the Iranian hostage situation when he was hired by the company that we both worked for, Anheuser-Busch. And you so very graciously gave me an autographed copy of that book. And just as an aside, that book I in turn gifted to a young woman at Anheuser-Busch who had you on a pedestal, and if you weren't married, she would have married you in a heartbeat. She loved you. I'll tell you off camera who that was. So I was able to find a copy of this recently. It was a bit of a search. But you had written this, and so there's a couple of things I want to talk about. First of all, this is your diary, and you were able to, I'll use the word smuggle out your diary, and as complete as this book is, your memory is brilliant. I mean, remembering that entire journey. What was the crux of the diary that you were able to keep there and not have it found or taken, and how did you get it out to turn it into a full book?
Yep. So obviously, the first 30 days, we were tied to a chair, not allowed to speak. You just sat there. At night, they put you down. It wasn't until after January 1st of 1980, they put us into a room, and I think at that point in time, as I look back, I'm only thinking of this, looking back, and I realized that we were going to be there. And we, as hostages, trust me, that first Thanksgiving, I thought, humanitarian, they're going to release us. Christmas, humanitarian gesture, they're going to release us. Didn't happen. New Year's Eve, they're going to release it. When that happened, you got buckled in and realized that, you know what, we're going to be here for a long time. Put us in a room, and I was in a room. Billy Gallegos, another Marine, and Plotkin, the American civilian that was taken. And so we were put into a guard sat by the door, but we weren't allowed to speak. And so we only looked at each other for each day. If we had to go to the restroom, the guard that was there would call another guard to walk to. So nothing happened. So they took us to the restroom blindfolded. You never left that room until you were blindfolded. You knew where everything was. They had complete control. After January 1st of 1980, they had complete control. They locked you in a room for the next 400 days. And we went outside a total of 7 times. But during time, eventually came to where the guard left. And so we start talking. It wasn't until February, I believe it is, that I started to write, messages and stories about what was happening, what I'm thinking, because at that point in time, when you're in a room with two other, you get tired of talking to each other. You want to be separate, and you have other feelings, and you're talking to other people. You're telling your story of what you're thinking of, and who you're thinking of back home. And It was a way for me to pass my time. And I knew that the Iranian knew I was writing diary because every time you would get paper, you'd say, yeah, I would write a letter back home. And the only way that you could write a letter back home is you had to write a delivery statement. I never had I got the paper, but nothing was going out the door. So they knew that I was keeping this diary. And so eventually they would start to take a shower like once a month or something like that. And so I had my diary underneath a 3-inch foam mattress, and I put like a little speck of paper in the middle. So knowing that when I came back, if that speck of paper was still there, that meant that they hadn't, touched it. But the speck of paper been in the middle of the room, that told me that somebody's been reading my diary. And so that's why you had to be very careful. You couldn't information. It wasn't a cool piece. It was a diary about me growing up in Crock, Missouri, Jill, my mom and dad, my brothers and sisters, you name it. And sure enough, I realized that after coming back and shower, they would put us back in the room, and you would see the piece of paper. It was so minute. They would not even see the piece fall. And so we knew them. So every place that we moved to, which was really about 4 days, I would put this diary and wrap it around my thigh in a plastic bag. And so the diary was in the same plastic bag and tied it around. Back in, March of 1980 was the time that we moved. And, but yeah, it was a diary. My English teachers in high school, I can tell you, were so incredibly surprised to see that I was and so I surprised myself. And so I was at an event at Topeka High School. And I mean, I was not a good student. I was a student. I was a guy that loved sports and loved to date girls and everything else, but I was not a studious person. And so I was at this high school class event, and so school librarian heard that I had a diary that I had kept, and came up to me afterwards and said, Rocky, have you ever thought about putting your diary into a book? And I'm looking at him, and me, a book? Never thought that. And so, interesting enough, they, Crawford Press, back in 1981, got together, and we put the book into, the diary into a book, which is what you see. And that picture is when I came home in St. Louis at the airport. That was me, up. And so, but yeah, that was my first book. The book was basically put, and Jill and I were supposed to be doing a book to circulate the book around the country in 1982. All just so happened, I started my job at Anheuser-Busch in 1982. So here, Jill and I had this dilemma: either book or Budweiser, and we chose wisely. We went with Budweiser for all of our effort, and so kind of like went away. And again, it is interesting. Out there, people read it, and then they put it back on, and people sell it. So I might have sold 20,000 copies, but I can honestly say I published a book.
Yeah, and you published a book with a story that only 51 other people could have even begun to tell, and you told it from your perspective. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to hold up the back cover of this book for those on YouTube. This is Rocky as a young executive at Anheuser-Busch when I first met him. So it shows how long it's been since he and I first met. And as far as us meeting at Anheuser-Busch, I'm just going to say this. You took your military experience and brought it to business in a tremendous way, and you were highly successful. And that resulted in tremendous business for Anheuser-Busch. Now, I'm going to close the door on that because you did good. But there's time ticking away, and there's two things I absolutely want to talk to you about. One is three things. One is the significance of the number 444 in your life, and you tell the story about going to said brewery, Anheuser-Busch, at one morning when you weren't in the best of moods, and you stopped at a 7-Eleven or a Quick Trip or whatever the convenience store was. Tell our listeners that, will you please?
Yeah, and Budweiser, Bill, is an incredible. In 92, when I first started, they said, "Rocky, what is it you'd like to hear?" And I said, I understand you have a military sales department, and I said, "Yeah, I would love to be part of that." Sure enough, it was, because my wife knew that she had asked me to leave the military, but she knew I still had that passion and love. Bill, it was such an honor to be a part of the Budweiser military sales team. My wife, when I got the job, she gave me the approval to travel abroad because that was her whole concern, me not leaving and possibly being taken hostage again. So anyway, one morning I was traveling the world and I had to catch a 6:30 flight. I'm getting dressed, and I run into a convenience store, running around thinking how much I've got to do the rest of the day. And I go up and I pay. I get a breakfast bar, a banana, and a water, and I owed $4.44. That number 444, the number of days I was held hostage. As I'm sitting there looking at the number, and I think to myself, "You're right, God. I mean, this day of catching the 6:30 flight, I would rather be doing that any day." My worst day when I was held hostage was when they put us up against a wall with 3 rifles to the back of the head. And, it's one of those numbers that comes to me when I'm really thinking I'm having a bad day or a bad situation. That number 444 reminds me how wonderful it is to be free.
And that is so powerful, and I love how you said, yeah, God, I get it, because to me that is a God wink. That is a little gentle reminder from God, from the universe, of saying, hey, you have reasons to be grateful. And we talked not too long ago. You were able to have that same type of reminder, maybe not as pleasant a situation as a breakfast bar and a banana, but when you pulled into a gas station and the gas price was $4.44 a gallon. So that 444 kind of keeps cropping up, huh?
Incredible. And it is, like I said, it's my reminder. Everybody's got their own little thing that keeps them in tune, but for me, it's that number 444 that just hits me, you name it, unexpected.
Well, I hope everyone has one of those triggers, because I strive to stay in an attitude of gratitude, and it's not always easier for me to do, and self-disclosure. But gratitude is the gateway to happiness, and in your situation, it's a reminder of how bad things could be versus how they are, and I love that. I want to talk now about one of the single most important things I feel in your life right now, beyond Jill and your children and family, but also something that we can all participate in. And it's an organization called Folds of Honor, Folds, Folds of Honor. Share with us what Folds of Honor is. You are the executive, you're one of the executives there.
Yes, I'm the senior VP of Budweiser accounts. So I retired from Budweiser in 2016, and I get this call from Lieutenant Colonel Rooney. This is a gentleman that I had met in 2007, a gentleman that put this organization, he and his wife, together over his garage. He was flying back from Chicago to Grand Rapids, and as they landed to the airport in Grand Rapids that late evening, the pilot had gotten on and said, "Hey, we asked that everybody remain on board. We're bringing the remains of a lost soldier home." He looks out to the right of the fuselage and sees this little boy standing on the tarmac and a wife weeping, and they bring off the coffin. This is a boy's father. And 20 minutes later, as at that time he was a Major Rooney's wiping his tears away, the pilot tells everybody, "Thank you for remaining on board." Major Rooney gets up, looks around, and realizes that over 3/4 of the people got off the airplane, nowhere to go than their warm blankets and their bed that this individual gave his life to. And so at that point in time, Lieutenant Colonel Rooney now put together this organization of Folds of Honor. Since 2007, over 35,000 scholarships have been provided, $160 million 41% of the recipients are minority, and every dollar that comes in, Bill, 91 cents goes into a scholarship for these fallen and disabled spouses and children of these men and women that give everything. 1% of our population is serving the war on terrorism. So 2007, I meet him. I'm the director of military sales. He tells me his story. I tell him my story. We have been friends. I retired from Budweiser. He calls and says, Rocky, you got to come on board with us. And you know what? My wife and I have talked about this, Bill, and it's such a great therapeutic piece for me, because I think of those 8 individuals that gave their life for me, and they had families. And so Folds of Honor is providing scholarships to families of fallen, just like those 8, and also to our disabled. So it's just been a great therapeutic piece for me to continue each day to wake up, not feel sorry for myself, not be mad, but think about those 1% of that population that's still serving the war on terror, that have families, and all the stories that we talk about, not knowing if they're going to come home. So, yeah, foldsofhonor.org, a great place to go. Your viewers, listeners can be a squadron leader by donating $13 each week or each month. And why $13? Because there's 13 folds to a flag. And so a great way for your viewers and listeners to get involved.
I think that is so fabulous. And what I love about it, Rocky, is, first of all, it's genuine in its role as a charity. 91 cents donated out of $1 is very significant, very higher than many, if not most, charities. Secondly, I mentioned earlier that when I was much younger and you were a hostage and the whole thing was tie a yellow ribbon, and I said, that's all we could do. This is something that we can take action on, and I'm urging my listeners and viewers to take action and discover what Folds of Honor is, make a donation, because regardless of what your thoughts are on the military or any of the actions, this is an apolitical organization. This is something that helps people and families of those that are brave enough to try, as Rocky talked about earlier. Those 8 individuals that gave their lives, they weren't thinking politics, they were thinking, we are Americans, and we're going to do what we can to rescue these people. It's a powerful organization. There's a lot of businesses that are tied into it, where you can donate by rounding up your purchase at the cash register. Whatever you do, please, please, please go to foldsofhonor.org and make a donation, become a squadron leader. If you want to make it $13 a week, I'm sure they'd be happy with that as well. So, Rocky, you are just a fascinating, phenomenal human being. You're just a model to me of how to live a good life based on principle and integrity, how to be a patriot. So we've talked for almost 2 hours now on just this podcast. And when you look at everything in perspective and you look at how your world is, share with us your view of what's the point.
You know what's the point? I go back to my wonderful parents that always told me, make sure that you have love of family, love of faith, and love of country. And, those 3 things are something that I've never forgotten. And I try to teach my children. I try to teach my grandchildren. I know my grandkids, whenever they see a flag, they hand salute, like, Papa hand salute. It's just, for me to have to continue, not to have to, I'm always going to continue to tell the story about those 8 that had the guts to try, lost their life, and so that I can live my life. It's like the movie Save Private Ryan, where he says at the end of the movie, earn it. And so each day I wake up, I earn my day for those memory of those 8 individuals.
Well, you have done that, and I am so grateful to call you friend. I'm so grateful to have you on the show for my first ever 2-part episode, and honestly, we could go on for 3 or 4. Thank you so much for your service, for your time, and for just being the man that you are, Rocky. And pass along our thanks to Jill and your family as well, because it's not just the 8 that sacrificed their life. It's your family, your parents, and Jill, and that have helped you get to where you are, which in turn is helping us. So thank you so much, my friend.
Yeah. No, thank you, Bill, and God bless America.
Thanks so much for tuning in. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We can promise you'll gain value in every one. Rating and reviewing makes us more discoverable and helps others find out what's the point. And if you'd like to know more about Bill Ellis or contact him, please visit his website, www.brandingpillars.com. See you next time.